Let's be honest, whenever things kick off in the Middle East, the world usually holds its breath. Why? Because oil. We've seen this film before. Prices skyrocket, petrol stations get queues around the block, and the global economy takes a massive hit. But this time, something's different. While everyone else is scrambling, there's one player that seems strangely calm. I'm talking about China. Now, on paper, China should be terrified. They are the world's biggest oil buyer. Most of that oil travels through a tiny, narrow gap of water called the Strait of Hormuz. If that gets shut down, China's massive industrial machine should, in theory, grind to a halt. But it hasn't. And that's because Beijing didn't just start worrying about this yesterday. They've been quietly building a fortress economy for over 2 decades. They've been preparing for a crisis exactly like the one we're seeing right now. Today, we're going to peel back the curtain on Fortress China. We're looking at how they've hoarded enough oil to keep a continent running, why they're turning dirty coal into high-tech chemicals, and how Donald Trump, yes, really, became the accidental architect of China's energy independence. To understand the genius, or the paranoia, of the Chinese strategy, you have to look at a map. Imagine you're the CEO of China Incorporated. You have thousands of factories that need power. You have 1.4 billion people who want to drive cars. Most people talk about the oil market as one big blob, but for China, it's about 2 specific, terrifying gaps in the ocean. First, there's the Strait of Hormuz. Think of this as the world's kitchen door. It's where nearly half of China's oil starts its journey. If Hormuz closes, that source is cut off. Everyone suffers, and prices skyrocket globally. But then, there's the real headache, the Strait of Malacca. If Hormuz is the kitchen door, Malacca is the front gate to China's house. This tiny strip of water near Singapore is only 2.8 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. Yet, 80% of China's oil imports, about 16 million barrels a day, must squeeze through this bottleneck. In the industry, they call this the Malacca dilemma. If a conflict breaks out, or if the US Navy decides to park a couple of carrier groups in that gap, China's economy effectively has its throat cut. Game over in weeks. For years, Chinese leaders have been losing sleep over this. Back in 2004, they started building their first strategic petroleum reserves. But fast forward to 2025 and 2026, and they've gone into overdrive. Recent data shows they've added another 169 million barrels of storage capacity just in the last 18 months. Their goal? A staggering 1 billion barrels in reserve. To put that in perspective, that's enough to keep their entire import machine running for 3 solid months without a single drop coming from a tanker. They aren't just buying oil, they are prepping on a national scale. What lit the fuse for this massive project? You might be surprised to hear it was Donald Trump. Whatever your politics, Trump's first term was a massive vibe check for Beijing. When the trade war started in 2018, China realized that relying on a global system controlled by the West was like building a house on shifting sands. If Washington could ban chips for Huawei, they could certainly block tankers for Sinopec. The message was clear: self-reliance or bust. The phrase self-reliance started appearing in every major speech by Xi Jinping. By 2020, as the pandemic was wrecking global shipping, Beijing published a roadmap for turbulence. It was basically a survival guide for a world where global trade is broken. Now, you might be wondering, what on earth does a biological virus have to do with energy security and giant oil tankers? To put it simply, the pandemic was the ultimate stress test for globalization, and the results were terrifying. Cast your mind back to 2021. Remember the empty shelves in our supermarkets? The sudden shortage of everything from electronics to garden furniture? That wasn't just a British problem, it was a global logistics meltdown. For decades, the world relied on a just-in-time delivery model. It worked brilliantly, until it didn't. When the pandemic hit, the system snapped. Thousands of empty shipping containers were stuck in the wrong ports. At the same time, the cost of sending a single 40-foot container from Shanghai to the UK skyrocketed. We're talking about a jump from roughly £1,500 to a staggering £15,000 in some cases. For Beijing, watching this from the sidelines was a massive wake-up call. They saw how easily a single virus could paralyze the world's busiest ports, like Ningbo or Shanghai. They did the maths. If a microscopic virus could cause this much chaos and park hundreds of ships offshore for weeks, what would a deliberate naval blockade do? This was the catalyst for what they call the dual circulation. It's essentially a roadmap for turbulence, a survival guide for a world where global trade is no longer reliable. They realized that if they couldn't trust the oceans to be open, they had to move their entire economy indoors. The pandemic proved that the global village was actually quite a fragile place. And Beijing decided right then and there they weren't going to be the ones left standing in the rain when the next storm hit. And then came Trump's return to the headlines. Every time there was a hint of Trump 2.0, China didn't just complain, they accelerated. They've been hoarding oil like there's no tomorrow. By 2026, they've built enough underground storage to hold a staggering 1 billion barrels of crude. That's enough to keep the entire country running for nearly 100 days even if the rest of the world stops selling to them. But hoarding is just a temporary fix. You can't hide in a bunker forever. You eventually have to change how the house runs. This is where China's strategy gets really clever and a bit controversial. China has a lot of coal. Like, a terrifying amount of coal. But coal is dirty, right? It's for power plants and smoggy chimneys. Or so we thought. Beijing looked at their coal mountains and thought, what if we could turn this into oil? Actually, it's not science fiction. It's an old German technology from the 1940s that China has perfected and scaled up to an insane degree. They call it coal to chemicals. Think about everything oil is used for besides fuel. Plastics for your iPhones, polyester for your clothes, fertilizers to feed the population. Usually, you need imported oil for that. But in 2025, China's chemical industry grew by over 5%, not by using more oil, but by burning through 276 million tons of coal. That is more coal than the entire United Kingdom uses for, well, everything, multiplied by 10. Take fertilizer as a prime example. While the rest of the world is seeing fertilizer prices skyrocket by 40% due to the war in the Middle East, China's prices are stable. Why? Because 80% of their fertilizer is now made from coal. They've effectively bypassed the global oil market for their food security. It's brilliant, it's controversial, and it's working. And if you think their control over coal was impressive, wait until you see how they've quietly cornered the market on the very future of energy itself. I am talking about the electric revolution. Now, if you ask a politician in London or Paris why they're pushing electric vehicles, they'll talk about green targets and net zero. But if you ask a strategist in Beijing, they'll give you a different answer: survival. For decades, the internal combustion engine was China's Achilles heel. Every petrol-chugging car on a Chinese motorway was a liability, a tiny straw sipping oil that China didn't own. But look at the transformation. By 2025, China didn't just encourage PVs, they effectively took over the global market. We're talking about a country where nearly 50% of new car sales are now electric or plug-in hybrid. That's not just a trend, it's a total structural shift. Think about the maths. Every time a delivery driver in Shenzhen swaps a diesel van for an electric one, that's a few dozen liters of oil that China no longer needs to import. Multiply that by millions of vehicles, and you start to see why China's demand for petrol and diesel has actually peaked and started to fall for 2 years running. They've poured hundreds of billions, with a B, into subsidies and charging infrastructure. It's the world's largest experiment in energy decoupling. While the West is still arguing about where to put the charging points, China has built enough of them to power a small planet. And it's not just cars. It's the high-speed rail network, the largest on Earth, all running on electricity. It's the electric buses and the electric lorries. They are literally electrifying their way out of a blockade. But wait, I hear you ask, where does all that electricity come from? If they're just burning more oil to make electricity, they haven't really solved the problem, have they? Well, that's the second layer of the fortress. Beijing isn't just changing the cars, they're changing the grid. In the last few years, China has installed more solar and wind power than the rest of the world combined. Seriously. In the Gobi Desert, they've built energy bases so massive you can see them from space. By 2026, their renewable capacity is expected to hit a level that most experts thought was impossible a decade ago. And here's the kicker, you can't sanction the sun. You can't put a naval blockade on the wind. By shifting their entire economy toward electricity and making that electricity from domestic sun, wind, and water, China is making itself UN blockable. It's the ultimate defensive move. While other nations are vulnerable to a pipeline being blown up or a shipping lane being closed, China is increasingly powered by what's right there in their own backyard. While most of the world is frantically checking the news for the latest update on the Strait of Hormuz, Beijing is playing a completely different game. It's not that they don't care about oil anymore, let's not be silly, they still import millions of barrels a day. But the sting has been taken out of the tail. When oil prices spike, it doesn't hurt China nearly as much as it used to. Think of it like an insurance policy that they've been paying into for 20 years. While the UK and Europe are struggling with the cost of living crisis and trying to figure out how to heat homes without Russian gas or Middle Eastern oil, China has created a domestic loop. They've got the coal for the chemicals, the sun for the power, and the batteries for the cars. They are essentially building an economy that can run offline from the Western-led global system if it really has to. And that, my friends, is a terrifyingly powerful position to be in. For nearly a century, the Americans had the petrodollar and the naval might to control the world's energy lanes. But China has realized that in the 21st century, you don't need to control the oil if you control the alternative to oil. Western leaders are starting to wake up to this, but they are playing catch-up. Every time a new Green Deal is announced in Washington or Brussels, they realize they have to buy the kit from. You guessed it, China. It's a brilliant, recursive loop of dominance that Beijing has carefully cultivated while everyone else was distracted. Is China's energy fortress perfect? No. It's expensive, it's environmentally questionable, and it relies on a level of state control that would make most Westerners itch. But you can't deny the results. And as we look at the headlines in 2026, it's clear that China isn't just surviving the transition, they've already built the world that comes next. What do you think? Has China actually made itself UN blockable, or are they just trading one set of problems for another? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, we actually read them, believe it or not. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers!